Hello everyone, welcome to this new tier list for Star Wars Unlimited. We're reaching now part 11 of this humongous tier list, and today we're going to talk about Cunning Heroism, starting off immediately with Chopper. So Chopper is the one-drop Spectre unit, which currently sees a little bit of play in two decks. The first deck is obviously in a Spectre deck as a way to get a cheap Spectre, and you also see sometimes this card being played in Sabine aggro as basically as a one drop. Sabine being the Sabine leader himself being a Spectre, and Sabine as a unit also being played means that Chopper is relatively, I would say, unreliably, but sometimes will be a 2-3, sort of a 1-3 raid for one, which is not amazing, but it's not completely terrible. Plus, of course, is a ability that sometimes can really screw with the opponent, but extremely unreliable. My opinion about Chopper is that he's not great. I think that as I said, you're gonna see it sometimes seen playing aggro as a way to get additional one drop. I think that, for example, as a one drop, is often going to be better than Cantina Brigard, but also because he's Heroism, meaning that he's not disturbing your for a cause I believe in. I think if you're gonna be going for one drop in an aggro Cunning deck, you're much better off going for Greedo. Greedo does not work with for a cause I believe in, but I think it's a fair compromise to make because Greedo is so much better than this little guy. So not only that, Spectre barely see any play. I'm gonna place this card in the D tier category. It's not completely unplayable, but it's pretty bad. I'm just gonna put it over Cantina Brigard. It's just simply not a very strong card. The ability is extremely unreliable. The stats are very horrible. Even when you do have a Spectre, the stats are not great at all. Yeah, not a great card at all. Next, we got Leia Organa, which has been one of the starter cards, and it was solid back then, and it's still very solid today. Comes into play, very cheap, can exhaust an enemy unit. There's basically two ways to use that card. You can either use her to exhaust one of your own resources. It effectively becomes a 2-2 for 1, which is not a great rate, but it's if you have this alongside another one drop, it's actually a pretty good. It's actually pretty decent to have that option sometimes. And more importantly, of course, the best ways to use Leia is obviously to play her to tap down an enemy large units and get a huge tempo advantage. It's once again, it is a rebel, it is heroism, so it has the right trait, the right color for a cause I believe in. You're gonna see this card typically in two kinds of decks. First of all, the aggro decks that play Cunning, as it is a way for you to get a tempo advantage as well as providing board presence. And you're gonna see this in solo decks, because Han Solos really like to have this in their toolbox as a unit they can bring back from the discard pile to tap down enemy units. So typically this card works very well with Ohm 1, for example. You play Ohm 1, you get back Leia Organa from discard pile into play to tap down a very big threat. It's a great card to pick up from U-Wing reinforcement because, once again, immediate impact. It only costs 2 resources, it's going to be able to tap down something. And it's also a card that you can bring back into your hand using Rogue Squadron Skirmisher. Sorry. So it's just a very solid card in the deck and basically the reason why it's very solid is because it's a unit. So you could argue that Asteroid Sanctuary giving a shield to a 3 cost unit is better than getting a 2/2. And in many cases that would be correct, but Leia being a unit is a huge advantage, specifically in that deck. And it's a card that you're going to be resourcing very aggressively. You're going to be placing it in the discard pile with Han Solo's ability, and there's tons of ways to bring it back into play, and that just makes it a very good card, specifically in those decks. So I'm going to place this in B tier. I think it's solid enough. It's been proven to be solid enough in multiple decks to be deserving of that slot. I'm going to place it over Devastator. Okay, I'm gonna place it basically between Devastator and Jedi's lightsabers. Next, we got Lothal Insurgent. So, Lothal Insurgent is once again one of those decent 2-drop. So 3-2 for 2. I said it before, I'll say it again. 3-2 is a much better stat line in this game than 2-3s. This allows you to trade with the 3-3 for 2 that you often going to see in turn 1. And not only that, it's also going to have an immediate it's also going to be a threat if it's not answered. He also has a when playability, which is not very powerful at all, but honestly, it doesn't matter. Just being a 3-2 for 2 rebel and with the heroism aspect is enough for this card to see play in aggro decks. So it's not amazing, but it's pretty solid. So I'm going to put this probably at the bottom of. So is it top of C tier or bottom of B tier? I'm going to put this at the top of C tier. It's not an amazing card by any means, but it's just very often going to see play in aggro decks. So I'm going to play this over Strike True, just as a solid card in aggro decks that do happen to play Heroism as a turn 1 play. Just comes into play, trade with most 3-drops in the game, and if you play it later on in the game, it has a little effect. The discard effect is not super relevant, but sometimes you can be lucky and discard a good card. Yeah, so not bad. Moving on, we got Vanguard Ace. So Vanguard Ace is a card which, by its appearance, is absolutely atrocious. Very difficult to get more than 1 or 2 experience token on this card, and obviously a 2-2 for 2 in space is pretty terrible. It's not a turn 1 play. It has it's a lot of work to make use of it, and even with the right use, with the right in the right situation, it's very underwhelming. It normally would be one of the worst cards in the game. It's not even a rebel, by the way. It's a New Republic card. So in normal time, this would be one of the worst cards in the game. But there's been one card which has saved this card from being completely irrelevant in Spark of Rebellion, and this card is U-Wing Reinforcement. So basically, U-Wing Reinforcement, you play U-Wing Reinforcement, you search, you can search for a 3-drop and another 2-drop, or a 1-drop or 2-drop or whatever, and then you put Vanguard Ace, and basically by the rules of the game, you've counted as having played 3 units that turn, because that's a U-Wing Reinforcement, 1 unit, another unit, and play Vanguard Ace. And this means that Vanguard Ace will effectively be a 4-4 for 2 in space. And 4-4 for 2 in space, even in the later stage of the game, that is very powerful, especially when you bring this alongside 2 other cards. So in this very specific context, Vanguard Ace is actually very nasty. Obviously the card would be absolutely unplayable in any of the circumstances, but the good news is that in Star Wars Unlimited, if you draw a card that is not very good, you can simply just resource the card. You just resource the card whenever you draw it, and then if you pick this up from a U-Wing Reinforcement, you're going to be very happy. And getting 3 units out of U-Wing Reinforcement is really not difficult at all. So, which deck can possibly play Vanguard Ace? Well, the only deck, from my knowledge, that can play Vanguard Ace is obviously Hand Green, because Hand Green is going to play U-Wing Reinforcement. It's actually a deck that is almost entirely built around U-Wing Reinforcement. It's a card that also very much can afford to play a couple of Silver Bullet, a couple of very situational cards in his deck, because it's a deck that really resources very aggressively, because you are resourcing, of course, once per turn, but you also resourcing using Hand's ability as well. So that means that if you ever top deck this card out of nowhere, you can very easily resources without any problem. And obviously later in later stages of the game, you can play the U-Wing Reinforcement, and if you find a Vanguard Ace out of your U-Wing Reinforcement, this will be very impactful. That the 4-4 in space for 2 is much better than the Battlefield Marine. It's significantly better than the Battlefield Marine. So Vanguard Ace, for all those reasons, deserve to be in the C tier, because it is not unplayable. I do not advise you to play more than one copy of Vanguard Ace, because if you play too many of them, of course it's going to clutter your hand, and then it's going to be a problem. But just playing one copy of Vanguard Ace in your Han green deck is actually not a bad idea, because as I said, if you ever draw that random copy, you'll be fine. And even if it's only a one-off in your deck, the chances that you can find it from U-Wing Reinforcement is actually relatively high, because U-Wing Reinforcement digs up for 10 cards. So this card will probably be at the bottom of D tier, but U-Wing Reinforcement just saves this card a little bit for it to make it the C tier. It is a very situational card, so it is obviously bottom of C tier. Moving on now to Ezra Bridger. So Ezra used to be a pretty big staple in Cunning Heroism, but as time went on, people realized that it's relatively difficult to actually draw a card from Ezra's ability. So the ability is simply just not that easy to use, and also happens to be a little bit too slow for an aggro deck. Aggro player usually want to have a 3-drop that have an immediate impact on the game, or is very punishing if not dealt with. And Ezra is neither of those two things. Because as I said, yeah, you could argue that letting an Ezra alive for too long can be a problem because it draws you cards, but it doesn't actually draw you card very often, because the top card that you want to play has to be a card that you want to actually play. Playing that extra card just for the sake of it, just for the sake of drawing a card rather than having better things you can do with your hand, is not a play that I would normally advise. You're much better off choosing the card that you want, instead of playing from the top of your deck. So the stat line is okay for a 3-drop, but it is not a 3/5 as Boba. I think if Ezra was a 3/5, it would actually see a lot of play. But as a 3/4 and the ability being relatively situational, is a bit difficult to justify Ezra in a lot of decks. With that being said, it does have the Rebel, the Rebel keyword, and the Force keyword, and the Spectre keyword, which are 3 very good traits. So the traits are really what are saving this card, in my opinion. So all in all, Ezra Bridger, the Force trait's not super useful, because usually people who play Force deck do not play Cunning. Really, the Force colors are blue and red in Rebel. On the heroic side. So Ezra Bridger really does not see play much in Force decks. It doesn't see much play in aggro decks, because aggro decks usually have better things to do on for 3-drop, notably cards that really are much more punishing if not dealt with. Yeah, compare this to, for example, a Fighter for Freedom, which has Saboteur, and if it's not dealt with, can deal you a lot of damage. Ezra Bridger doesn't do that. So all in all, you end up only see play in Spectre decks. So I'm gonna put this card relatively high in C tier, but it's gonna remain a C tier card. It just hasn't seen enough play. Even solo decks who used to play this card a lot don't play it anymore, and it's really, as there's just better things to do. So I'm gonna place it under Lothal Surgeon, probably under Academy Defense Walker, over Repair. Yeah, that seems to be a good place for it. Next, we got the best Cunning Heroism card, and that is the Millennium Falcon. This card is incredibly strong in 2 decks, once again, which are honestly the 2 decks that play Heroism and Cunning right now, which are the Sabine aggro deck, the Sabine Cunning deck, as it is an excellent finisher that comes into play ready and can attack right away, which is exactly the kind of card that aggro wants to do, especially on the top curve. And it also see plays in a solo deck, and the reason why people like to play in solo is because you can pay for his upkeep cost using the temporary resources that solo had to discard this turn anyway. Meaning that if you used Han Solo's ability on the turn before, you don't have to pay for the, it's almost like you get the Falcon upkeep for free. What I like to call the Falcon tax. So this card is very strong, but it is not an early game play. Playing this card early can sometimes be awkward, because if you have to play the Falcon tax from turn 2 up to the end, it can be a really massive inconvenience. It's more something that you're going to be playing in the later stage of the game. So yeah, this card is hugely impactful in those two decks, and it's a great card to bring back from Home 1 if you're playing hand green. It's a great card to get from Ewing Reinforcement as well if you're playing hand green. It is one of the best, one of the big reasons to play Cunning with Sabine, and this card is just extremely powerful in those decks. So now the big question that I'm wondering is if this card is impactful enough to be deserving of the S tier slot. And in my opinion, it is. And the reason why it is because even though it is in a color combination that is not very powerful, in my opinion, Cunning Heroism is considered one of the worst color combination in the game. This card by itself justifies the existence of almost two decks. I don't think Ant Green would be, I think Ant Solo as a leader would not be nearly as strong if this card did not exist. And I think that there would be no reason to play solo Cunning if this card did not exist. So this has a pretty significant impact on the meta. Another big argument in favor of Falcon is like it does something that no other card in the game can do, or very few other cards in the game can do, and at the early stage of the game. So and relatively unconditionally, and all those reasons brings me to put this. I'm going to put this at the bottom of C tier. So if you compare this to the other cards that are going to be on S tier, I think it is probably one of the least impactful, but it is an incredibly powerful card. It's also very good at dominating the space arena. You come into play, you can kill an A-wing, then you get ready and you get to attack something else. So it's just a very, very powerful card, and I think it's barely deserved the S tier status, in my opinion. Next, we got Rogue Operative. Rogue Operative used to be considered one of the best aggressive 3-drop in the game, and he has fallen off a lot since then. I still believe this card is a little bit underplayed. Basically, we got a 3-drop that is relatively hard to kill, and deals 4 damage every time it attacks, and also has the Saboteur keyword. So I think it's a pretty decent 3-drop, but most people have been preferring to play obviously the Falcon, the Fighter for Freedom, and Red 3 as an aggressive 3-drop. Basically, the main weakness of Rogue Operative is that obviously when he comes into play, he only has 2 attacks, so there's ways to kill him without really taking much damage back, and of course no immediate impact on the game. But it can be a scary threat if not dealt with. I think Rogue Operative is honestly a pretty decent card in an aggro deck, but it's just been overshadowed by better cards like Red 3 and Thorrk, I believe. So I think this card is still pretty solid. I would definitely place it in C tier. As its display, I would personally prefer to play a Rogue Operative over an Ezra Bridger in an aggro deck, as once again it just attacks for more damage, and as Saboteur just makes more sense in an aggro deck. I'm going to place it slightly under Lothal Insurgent in the C tier category. Next, we got Azintuk Liberator Gunship, which is a card which I think is actually pretty good, but doesn't see any play. And the reason why this card doesn't see any play is simply because it does almost the same thing as Falcon, but more often than not worse than Falcon. So Falcon comes into play, attack a space as a pseudo ambush. It's not exactly an ambush, but the fact that it comes to play 1 turn earlier, has the same stats and does almost the same thing, and can do many other things that a gunship cannot do, means that Falcon is always going to be the preferred option as a way to dominate the space arena. And if you're already playing a 3/4 for 3 that can come into play and kill stuff, you don't need to play this card. So this card is actually very similar to TIE Interceptor, to Imperial Interceptor, which we rated A tier earlier. And I think that so by any means we should definitely think about putting this card in A tier as well, right? But once again, the context in which this card is placed matters a lot, and the fact that it's literally is a worse version of a Falcon means that people end up never having space for this card in the end. Obviously, there's a few things that makes it a little bit worse than Interceptor. It doesn't have the Rebel keyword like the Interceptor has the Imperial keyword. It has sometimes if you're attacking something that has a lot of attack, it can die in the process. Sometimes there's nothing to ambush and then it becomes a 3-4-4-4, which is pretty nice. So I don't think it's a bad card. I think if it's on the same power level like Imperial Interceptor, but the competition with Falcon means that it barely, almost never sees any play. And this matters for a lot. So I'm going to place this in C tier. If you're looking for more presence, if you're playing a yellow-white deck and you are looking for more anti-space unit, you can definitely, this is your next best option after the Falcon. So I'm going to place this in C tier. As I said, this card would be rated much higher if I would rate this card much higher in this list if Falcon did not exist. So we're going to place this in C tier right over the Academy training. Moving on with Chewbacca. So Chewbacca is an interesting big Sentinel unit. So I've already talked about big Sentinel unit that really get out-countered by Waylay and by Spec Force soldiers, and that really limits the potential for them in a lot of situations. And among the big Sentinel units, I would say Chewbacca is not the best one. With that being said, it does have 6 HP. It is the only Sentinel unit that comes for 5 resources and has 6 HP. So among the different big Sentinel units, it is among the cheapest one. So it is very similar to Vigilant Honor Guard in the sense that, but it has 1 less attack, but it has a Sentinel all the time, and he has a special ability which allows him to ready when he gets attacked, which is a very relevant ability if your opponent does not have like a way to one-shot the Chewbacca. So it's a card that is very inconsistent. There are situations where it's very good, and there are situations where it simply just get one shot, get disabled by Spec Force soldiers, gets bounced by Waylay, and it doesn't do much. So it's a card that is relatively difficult to rate because its effectiveness is very up and downs. In my opinion, it is a decent card, but not amazing. It is definitely playable in some decks, but in deck in which it's playable, it's not going to be like amazing. For me, it is worthy of a C tier status. I'm going to place this probably. I'm probably going to place this over Base Marbles here in the mid C tier section. It's not a terrible card, but it's a card that I personally play in my hand deck as a way to get like a Sentinel units, and it's been performing pretty well. It's a good card to pull from U-Wing Reinforcement, as it gives you like a big body, a big Sentinel body. Next we got Lando Calrissian. So Lando Calrissian does something very unique. It's the only card in Spark of Rebellion that allows you to return card that you've previously resourced back into your hand. Basically, returning a card, a card that you've resourced back into your hand is effectively trading tempo for card advantage. So you are trading resources, you're trading time, and you're trading that in favor of cards. And I said it before, and I say it again. In Star Wars Unlimited, trading tempo for card advantage is not a good idea most of the time. And the reason for it is because you are drawing 2 cards per turn, you're relatively unlikely to run out of cards, and most likely card advantage is not really a big deal most of the time. And losing resources is a very big deal. So another interesting, so basically at the beginning people would thought about Lando Calrissian to be played in an aggro deck, because in an aggro deck you can very easily play this card and then return into your hand, play this card and then return into your hand a couple of cards and be at the top cover. It's a 6/5 Saboteur, that pretty big body that is a very huge threat, and you draw a couple of cards and you give yourself some gas, like a top cover, a little bit similar to Black One as a way to kind of refill your hand. And another way people I thought about this card would be in hand and kind of return to hand the temporary resource. And actually, when this card was first revealed, I thought it worked like this. I thought that it would be a card that you would combine with Han Solo to return the temporary resources of that Han is playing, and you put them back into your hand. The problem is that the timing does not work like this. Of course, when Lando comes into play, the cards have already been, the temporary resources have already been used, so it doesn't really work well with Han Solo at all. Because you're still going to lose the resources from Han because it doesn't work. So pretty much it doesn't work on Han, and in aggro does not need card advantage. So those two factors combined means that Lando Calrissian basically doesn't see any play whatsoever. And another thing is, like, if you want to play this in a solo deck, it's terrible because solo plays plenty of cards that cost more than 6 resources. So if you're playing a Lando and you're actually using his ability, you are condemning yourself for the future. So basically the ability is not good. In 90% of the case, it's simply not very good. The question is a 6/5 Saboteur worthy of costing for 6 is worthy? And the answer is once again no. Once again, you're playing a card that has no immediate impact on the game. 5 HP means the card gets killed by takedown, gets killed by false choke, gets killed by plenty of removal spells, by removal event, and more often than not, Lando cannot do anything. As of now, I'm gonna shock some people, but as of now, I don't think Lando Calrissian has any business being in any deck. I've never seen this card being effective, and for me, it is an unplayable card in the current state. I mean, as I said, everything is playable, I guess, but it's a card that if you're putting this in your deck, you are hurting your deck. So I'm gonna put this in D tier, and I'm gonna place it below this the Consular Security Force. It's simply, I've never seen this card being effective, and right now there's just no reason to play this card into your deck. Next we got Han Solo Reluctant Hero, which is the final card of this cycle of 7 resource units that come into play, have an immediate impact into play, and leave a pretty big body on the board. And Reluctant Hero is a pretty solid one. It comes into play, kill something, and stay alive. As long as you are capable of hitting units that have 6 HP or less, your Han Solo keeps gonna give you value. If your opponent decides to not play any unit on the ground arena in order to not get hit by Han, then Han can slap the base for 6, which is pretty strong. Right now, the biggest obstacles for Han there's been 2 obstacles for Han as a unit. The first one is the fact that he's obviously a fairly expensive unit in a color combination that had the reputation to be more aggressive. But however, and the second obstacle that he had was the fact that he has only 6 attack, and that is not quite enough to kill the most important targets in this game, which are the 7 health leaders, notably Boba Fett. So that has been kind of an obstacle for him. I still believe Han's Reluctant Hero is a great, powerful card in a mid-range Cunning Heroism deck, which we haven't seen many of right now. But the great advantage is like it plays extremely well with Han as a leader. Actually, the only place where it currently sees play is in Han as a leader, because Han can go for this really big turn where you are on turn 3, you have 4 resources in play. No, sorry, you're on turn 4, you have 5 resources in play. You use Han's ability to get 6 resources, and then you summon Han, and then you attack with Han to get up to 7 resources, and then you use those 7 resources to play Han, and that means you played Han basically 2 turns earlier. And if you played a resupply on turn 1 or in turn 2, you can also play Han on turn 4. You can play Han Solo on turn 4, which is pretty nasty. So it's a really good card in Han, in Han leader. It doesn't see play anywhere else, but I think it is enough to place this card at least in the B tier category. And I think that this card has the potential to get a lot stronger as we see more. I think I prefer Han over Mace Windu, so I'm going to place him just right above him here in the B tier category. I think it's just a very solid card. It just hasn't seen play because right now Cunning Heroism is kind of in a rough spot, and we don't see a lot of Cunning Heroism deck at the moment outside of in Han Solo. So B tier is going to be where I'm going to place this card. But he has the potential to go up to A tier, no problem, if given the right context. Moving on, we got Bamboozle. So Bamboozle is a very interesting card that basically it's a way to exhaust enemy units and return their upgrades. So it's basically mostly, in my opinion, a sideboard cards for aggressive deck as a way to deal with very upgraded units. It can be played for free if you discard a Cunning card, which is something that is not something you would do most of the time, but can be done in an emergency if needed. The reason why I don't think you would do is because you're only saving 2 resources. The card is relatively cheap, so and having to discard an extra card to what we call in trading card game pitching a card is something that you do not want to do unless necessary. I mean, yes, card advantage doesn't matter so much in Star Wars Unlimited, but you still there's limit to that. Of course, there's limit of cards you have in hand. So it's a card that is very strong against certain archetypes that plays unit, for example, Lieutenant Charleston that has loads of experience counter on him, or cards like that are gonna put like a lot of upgrades, very good against Shirut, for example. So basically, Bamboozle is very strong in certain decks. It's never completely unplayable because it always still does exhaust a unit, but I would say that Bamboozle is more of a sideboard card than anything else. Yeah, so it's a decent sideboard card, nothing amazing. I'm gonna put this relatively high in C tier, maybe over, yeah, maybe over below the Academy Defense Walker, but above Ezra. So just as it's just a solid sideboard option for those white yellow decks. But the problem is that it's very redundant with a lot. There's so many ways to exhaust units in this color, so the card is a little bit redundant with a lot of stuff that this color combination is already doing. So really the relevant part is the returning the upgrade into hand, which is good but very specialized. Last but not least, we got Spark of Rebellion, the first selective discard event in Star Wars Unlimited. And this card is a relatively strong late game card. I know it only costs 2, but it's a card that honestly is much stronger as a way for you to fight into the late game. Early on in the game, spending your turn 1 to have no impact on the board is something that I would say is very dangerous. However, in late game situation, being able to discard a super laser blast or discard a powerful unit that your opponent has whenever you are fighting in late game situation, this card is very, very powerful in that context. So to me, it is more of a sideboard card that you're typically going to see in hand decks. Once again, it's more of a mid-rangey card, because if you're playing aggro, spending 2 resources, not impacting the board, I've seen this card being played in aggro, but I don't know if this card is good in aggro, to be honest, because losing tempo to discard a card that might or might not matter is not something I would necessarily advise. Unless they're really specific card that really screw you over, but most of the time you're just trying to be as aggressive as possible. However, in the mid-range decks that want to improve in Han Solo, that wants to basically improve his late game matchup, Spark of Rebellion is an excellent card that is going to allow you to get rid of those expensive units, or even like those specific cards like No Good to Me Dead that really hurt Han. And in this context, Spark is a very good card. So right now, once again, what is hurting Spark of Rebellion is the fact that it is effectively Cunning Heroism, which is, in my opinion, the worst color combo in the game. And for that reason, it doesn't see as much play as it should. But it is, in my opinion, a very solid card. I'm going to place it over Command on the B tier category. And I would say this card would be placed much higher on this list if only Cunning Heroism was a bit better as a color combo. And here it is. This is all the Cunning Heroism card, and I just want to say Cunning Heroism card is by far the weakest color combo in the game. Um, for multiple reasons. The first reason, as you can see here, is that the quality of the card is not very high. Not a single card in A tier, only one card in S tier, and even that card, you could argue, is an A tier card, and it's really at the bottom of C tier. Simply just not super, not a high quality. And I think the second massive problem with Cunning Heroism is the fact that it has doesn't have a clear direction. It doesn't have a clear thing that it wants to be doing. Every other color in the game, color combo, it's very clear what they want to do. The black blue is really the control. Black yellow is very about the tempo. White red is really about the aggression. Like every color combo has a very clear objective. White Cunning is probably the color combo that is the most confusing. Like it's very hard to know what the developer wanted to do with that color combo, and that hurts the overall archetypes a lot. Anyway, with all that being said, the next time we're going to talk about our mono Cunning cards. And until then, see you next time, and please tell me if you have any disagreement or if you just like the video.